Okay, so we're at 2 o'clock, so I think we'll start. So thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to be able to welcome you to our Responsible Disruption Innovation Table Zoomcast. My name is James Gamage, and I'm the Director of Innovation and the Social Impact Lab at the United Way of Calgary and area.
And my name is Monique Blau, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Design in the lab and at J5 Design, a Calgary-based design firm. And we are your hosts for Responsible Disruption. We are delighted to welcome our listeners, viewers, and guests as we discuss artificial intelligence. But before we begin, in the spirit of our journey to promote reconciliation, I would like to honor the truth of a shared history and acknowledge Treaty 7 territory and the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, including Chikini, Bearspaw, and the Wesley First Nations. I would also like to recognize the Métis people and the Inuit people who have made their home here in Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary. We stand against racism and intolerance in any form, and we believe everyone deserves to live in equitable communities that are built on inclusion, diversity, understanding, and tolerance. At the Social Impact Lab, we strive to put people first, to create a diverse and inclusive culture where everyone feels safe and valued. So a few housekeeping items to cover for today. We are recording the session, so if you want to share it with your colleagues or friends, we'll email a link to you following this session. The recording will also be available on our YouTube channel. And our next episode of Responsible Disruption is scheduled for April 21st at 2 p.m., and we will be discussing inclusivity in design. Our agenda today will introduce our guests, move to a lively conversation, review audience questions, and then we'll have our close. If you'd like to ask a question along the way, you can do so by clicking on the QA button in the Zoom panel. We'll be collecting these throughout the episode, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. This is an engaging conversation, and I'm sure there's lots of questions out there, so don't be shy. The Social Impact Lab is a collaboration between J5 Design and United Way of Calgary in an area. And it is our response to the disruption. As we are seeing in the social sector, disruption is occurring. At the lab, we invest in innovation, which we are calling responsible disruption, and ensuring that at every change, the results that we do are considered and fair to Calgarians and communities. Our Responsible Disruption episodes are a series of discussions with leading players about disruption in their fields. So today, blow your mind with artificial intelligence. We've all heard of the potential of artificial intelligence or AI, but did you know that a recent PwC study predicted its potential value could be a staggering $16 trillion in North America by 2030? Organizations are waking up to technology, and Adobe has predicted that while 15% are currently using AI, 31% said that it was on their agenda for the next 12 months. Staggering. With this rapid growth, what opportunities have opened for businesses and not-for-profits by using AI? How can AI be used for good? How does an organization get started, and what are the drawbacks to look for and to consider? And as individuals, how can we get involved? These are all questions that are running through our minds as we launch into today's episode. We are speaking with three leaders who are foremost AI experts in the field and in the city of Calgary. They will use their deep experience in artificial intelligence to answer these questions and many more as we try to understand the rapid changing uses of this technology and how it's improving our everyday lives.
So let's meet this week's guest. So our first guest is Margaret Glover Campbell. So Margaret is the COO of Virtual Gurus. Margaret's career began in advertising, where she was drawn to her startup clients who were creating new technologies. After moving client side, she has worked primarily in startups, being drawn to the excitement of creating something new. She is passionate about women's issues and served as board chair for Chic Geek, a non-profit empowering women to succeed in the tech sector. As COO for Virtual Gurus, her mission is to create meaningful employment for underrepresented individuals. Next, we have Kwame Asiedu. Kwame is the co-founder of BrainToy, an artificial intelligence platform company in Calgary, Alberta. His goal is to empower individuals and organizations to embrace AI to solve meaningful problems and build solutions that customers can love and trust. And finally, we have Dr. Justin Weinhardt. So Justin is an associate professor of organizational behavior and human resources at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary. His research focuses on examining dynamic decision-making, computational modeling, and ethics of AI ML algorithms. He has published numerous academic articles in top management journals. In addition to his academic work, he has written for the Globe and Mail and Harvard Business Review. He has a pile of half-read books next to his bed and his desk and his couch, which I'm sure we can all relate to. So welcome to you all. And thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm going to kick off with the questions now. And just before I do that, I just want to remind our audience that the quality of these sessions is really down to the audience involvement. So, we make these sessions are a lot more interesting for everybody if we actually deal with audience questions. So we're very keen to hear from you during the Zoomcast. So in the Q&A box you see at the bottom of your screen, if you have a question, please use that, and Monique and myself will get to those questions and I'll ask them of the panelists. So please ask away. So I'm going to kick this off with a bit of a level set, and I think we need to start with a definition of what artificial intelligence is. So Justin, could you take that, please? Could you just define what we're talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence?
Sure. I think maybe at the general level, when we talk about artificial intelligence and what we think of artificial intelligence is maybe different from what it actually is. So when I think most people think of artificial intelligence, you get everything from the Terminator to and like Skynet to iRobot to lots of other different science fiction things. Maybe some people also think of AI as a computer program that makes decisions, or maybe even some sort of simulation. And in some ways, those things are maybe all true. Hopefully there will not be Terminators. But really what artificial intelligence is at its most basic form is really just intelligence, which is the ability to obtain information from our environment and use that information in the most successful way to achieve some goal. And so I forget exactly who said this, but it's a professor at MIT. So, it has to be true. He's smart, he's at MIT, is that, we don't talk about planes as robotic birds or artificial birds. They're planes, and they both are using aerodynamics to fly, but they're doing it in different ways. And so probably as we go down the line, we'll maybe start to think of AI, a computer programming, using maybe information to make decisions as maybe not that far off from what we do. And a lot of people in AI try to study the brain and study human beings to actually make better artificial solutions to things.
Cool. So I like sort of debunking some of the myths there about it, and that parallel with human intelligence. So people might have also heard, listeners might have also heard the terms machine learning and deep learning. Could you just briefly touch on what those are as well, just to cover that off as well, please?
So any of the machine learning or deep learning or algorithm are a set of instructions to get some input, some pieces of data to the output, to making a decision, to getting a car to drive. And how that process happens gets more complicated. depending on what you're using. So you could have things be really simple, like regression, or just even calculating the mean of something. That could actually be a machine learning algorithm that you run lots of times. Or then it can get intensely complicated, where more in deep learning that you have multiple like layers of different algorithms operating with one another to kind of create some solution to something. So for driving a car, there might be all these different layers in a neural net, and that's like another term that people use, of neural networks, about things to get to some decision. But in its really simplest form, it's a way of bringing together inputs with some output.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So now we sort of level set and just define some terms. I want to talk about demand for AI, the AI technology in organizations. So Kwame, BrainToy, for whom you work, works with organizations to solve problems and using AI and machine learning. So where have you seen demand for your services of late in organizations? You know, what kind of problems are they trying to solve?
Yeah, thank you. So organizations mostly are trying to be proactive, and they want to enjoy what I call the triple benefits of AI, which is either improving some type of efficiency or reducing some type of cost, and then maybe improving profits. And so you find people in different organizations, from oil and gas to financial institutions, even to in the medical sector, to insurance companies. These are all trying to apply this AI techniques in solving problems. Now, some of them are building, for instance, recommendation engines that basically recommends products to people that interact with them through a certain channel. It could be a chatbot, it could be through their website, it could be calling on the phone to talk to a call center agent, but who have access to this recommendation engines. And based on the behavioral characteristics of these customers, it makes a recommendation that, hey, this person could take you up on this product. One of the very simplest models people are building or solutions is customer churn. Telecommunications, as an example, are building machine learning and AI solutions to predict customers that are potential flight risk. And this is because it costs them more money to acquire new customers than to retain existing ones. So once you are able to predict that so-and-so customer could potentially leave, and this is why, then you can put in place interventions to mitigate the risk of them leaving. The accounting sector has also started using it. Most of the time, auditors used to sample, they would take a sample of transactions or of data to be able to audit it. But now some of them are using artificial intelligence so they can take the entire data set and they'll be able to learn, and based on certain behaviors, they are even able to predict that this or that firm is fraudulent. I'm sure you've heard of other things like fraud detection and others, but in the health sector, there are stroke units that are trying to use artificial intelligence to detect the onset of stroke. People are also predicting diabetes. So it cuts across different organizations, and oil and gas, I guess, yes. So I think these are some of the problems that are being solved in this sector.
Cool. So pretty wide ranging, I'm hearing, but obviously, you know, like any, there's a fair amount of oil and gas focus in Calgary, like any application or any kind of service offering that we experience here. So Margaret, however, so Virtual Gurus matches organizations with the need for an assistant to a skilled freelance worker in North America. And there's a deep social mandate to the work. You know, inclusivity is paramount. And I know your focus is on hiring those who would otherwise potentially have a hard time finding work. So the social sector is relatively new to the party when it comes to AI. Where can you see the technology being applied in the social sector, and how can AI be used for good to level the playing field?
Yeah, absolutely. So at VG, one of the things that we're just beginning to look at is how can we leverage machine learning to increase our intake of virtual assistants, right? How can we use natural language processing and character recognition to review resumes? How do we do that without inherent bias that can come into play when reviewing resumes? There's a ton of horror stories out there about bias being brought into hiring practices because of the models that have been trained in AI. From our perspective, if you look at, and I think Justin might talk about this a little bit, but if you look at the psychological character traits of some of our clients and the psychological character traits of some of our VAs and use AI through a data set matching algorithm and pattern to actually create really solid matches around which virtual assistant is going to work best with which client, right? There's just, from my perspective in our work, there's a ton of work to be done there. But generally outside of what we're doing and in the social world at large, a lot of what Kwame talked about from a health perspective, there's a ton happening right now in the healthcare industry and AI to be able to predict better outcomes for humans when it's used.
Cool. And I know BrainToy, also Kwame, talks a lot about sort of democratizing AI and making it accessible to anyone. So how should an organization start with using the technology? And, where should an organization start? Who should lead the AI efforts? And, do we need to think about infrastructure requirements as well? So, when you're working with a client that's sort of starting out on their AI journey, what would you recommend?
That is a loaded question. I can probably talk about.
Wasn't meant to be, but
there are so many different pieces of it, but this is great. Yeah, when you walk into an organization, first, it will be good for them to be aware of what AI is. So that awareness is very important. And it is true that organizations have analytics teams, they have innovation teams and IT teams that are usually set out to or structured to transform the organization and to embrace new technology. We think differently, because usually what happens is that then you have to hire these gurus. I'm using Margaret's. So you have to hire these gurus or unicorns, right? That are always responsible for building these solutions. And the way they do it is they'll try to understand the problems of other people, and then they'll craft a solution for them. But unicorns don't scale. And so for us, the best thing is for everyone to understand and be aware of the potential of what AI is, the opportunities that are available in the organization. So once they are aware of it, then they're able to identify these opportunities. And because everyone has a domain knowledge, whether you're an accountant or you work in supply chain, whatever that field is, you understand the data and the problems that goes on well for you. And so what we do is we try to empower you with the principles and the technology that makes it easy for you to apply AI. And so different units are able to embrace it. But for an organization that has never used it, yes, being aware of AI, identifying problems or opportunities that AI could help you, narrowing those problems down to something that is tangible. It could be something very smaller. Identifying the data sets that are available in your organization that can help you at least do a proof of concept using these machine learning techniques to do a proof of concept on that problem that you have, and then building something or prototyping something that could be tested out, refined, and then create more or less like a feedback loop such that it's now really solving the problem that you intended for it to solve, and then beginning to implement it is the best way to go. Infrastructure, you definitely have to think of it. You can never do any of this without computers, without platforms, without technology. And this is what has influenced a lot of companies in moving to the cloud, because if you want to buy all of this hardware in-house to be able to run the computation that is needed, it's expensive. Granted, some organizations do that, and we work with some oil and gas companies here that want everything to be on premise. But whether it's on premise or it's in the cloud, you need computers to do this. And so you have to think of infrastructure, the networking, how data flows, how they connect to your data sources, how they are organized between your teams, and how they are actually solved, deployed such that they can be integrated into business applications, whether they are new or they are legacy applications, is really, really key.
Thank you. There's actually a question that's in the Q&A box, which actually runs on quite nicely from what you've just been saying. So James Russell asks, prior to mobile phones, employers wanting to use tech had to pay for and supply hardware and the software for their employees to use. Now with mobile phone apps, we are seeing employers able to rely on the phones their employees already have, and they just need to come up with software and apps. How is this impacting or accelerating how much AI is being used? Are you seeing that with some of your clients, Kwame?
So in that context, I think what I would say is organizations could allow individuals to use their own computers, but connect to the data and the technology that belongs to the organization in the cloud environment. And they block off the ability to download any of this data, because privacy is a big piece of this, is very important. So because of that, they block all access to downloading this data or sharing them with other people who are not in that organization. But for most organizations that are very serious about their data and data privacy is a concern, and mostly they care about their clients because they want to avoid any unintended consequences and exposure, they will give you these devices. It's not just about the apps that are being built. They will give you devices that will let you have access to the data, because that's the most important key here, the data which belongs to the organization and to their clients. And so it's very difficult for them to let you come in with your own device and to use it. Now, on the other hand, if it's an AI application that you are just using as a user, of course, you can run it on your own computer and on your own laptop, on your own device. But if you are really going to apply the principles to solve a problem for an organization that has collected data from people, then there will be restrictions, even if you are allowed to use your own data.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Thanks for answering that. I'm going to ask a question of Margaret. So we've heard from Kwame about how an organization might need to start out and some of the places they might want to start, and maybe some of the infrastructure they might need to think about and the use of the cloud, et cetera. But thinking more broadly about the success factors, does there need to be an organizational cultural shift to drive an effective AI strategy? What do you need to think about as an organization from a cultural point of view?
Absolutely. So, sometimes right now it's like the early days of the internet, right? It's a solution looking for a problem. In the early days of the internet, for anybody who's as old as I am and remembers that, it was basically brochureware put online, and now we see kind of the advances that have happened there. So from the perspective of AI in organizations and culturally, you have to have buy-in from the top. If you don't have buy-in from your executive suite, it's not going to work, because there are so many challenges to implementing AI. It's expensive. The cost of it is definitely coming down with different models that are out there and access to different data lakes and that type of thing. But the overall costs to get started, to get your data set up, to find a question that is answerable, to make sure that your data is labeled properly, to train your model, to feed information back into your model, there's a lot of work. There's also a lot of risk because depending on how your model is written, you could have your information or your data could be overfitted to the solution, which essentially means that it looks like your model is working and giving you really good answers, but when you go into production, so to say, and start to feed your real data through it, your results are off. And so you basically have to go back to square one. So it's not like software engineering where you can come in and it's relatively well understood about how to software engineer a problem. There's a lot that has to happen. You have bias in your data. The model could be trained improperly, right? There's a lot of risk inherent in implementing an AI solution. So if you don't have that cultural buy-in from the top to say it's okay if we try it and fail, because failure is a point of learning and we can progress from there. So if you don't have somebody at the top that says that's okay, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and it sounds much like embarking upon an innovation strategy with an organization. You need to accept that, it's an iterative process. You're going to try some things and they're not going to work, and you have to countenance the F word, failure, every now and then, and position it as learning. So that's a really good insight. Thank you. So I want to turn to Justin now, and Margaret mentioned about optical or natural character recognition and in the hiring process, and some of the pitfalls that are apparent within that, around bias and the like. So when an organization embarks on that journey, it's really important to consider ethical implications of the technology. So a lot of your academic work is focused on bias and fairness in AI algorithms. So, and we hear about bias in data sets, and but how does that play out in organizations using AI for decision making, and how can it be prevented?
Yeah. So how it comes about is for a few different reasons, at the very least. Part of it is that most machine learning, unless it's rather simple, but things, especially like deep learning, we're not exactly aware of how it's getting to its outcome. It's what people kind of refer to as a black box. So information goes in, and then some things happen, and job applicants don't exactly know what is being analyzed by looking at their resume. Maybe even other people inside the company don't exactly know what's happening, including maybe even some of the developers. And so you can have some bias that comes about because of the input going in. You can have also some bias made by the developers of the model. For better or worse, that actually seems like less of a concern, that there is actually bias being built into these algorithms. It is more of these algorithms are picking up on the input data and then you see the bias or the result of that. So for example, a famous case was a situation about 2 years ago that Amazon used machine learning to determine whether people should, for engineering positions, and it selected no female candidates at all, like zero. And because the machine learning algorithm discounted universities that had higher proportion of women coming from them, And the reasoning is possibly that it thinks that there were less engineering candidates in the training sample that came from those universities. So then it discounts that. And then it discounted some other different things through the cover letter. And so no female candidates were chosen. Now, whether people are skeptical of Amazon, you maybe trust that like somebody was doing something nefarious. It doesn't seem like that, but there are other even simpler situations where, say you have a new startup and you want to advertise your company through Facebook ads or Google ads. If you minimize cost as your output, you will then only advertise to male individuals because men are less likely to click on links and we shop less. And so even if it's advertising a company that is not exactly selling something, but just advertising like a consulting company that doesn't have an exact physical product, the advertising modules don't really know what it's doing. It's just minimizing the cheapest, and then you'll have no women look at your ad. And there's no rule in there that says exclude women from this. It happens because of data that women purchase more. And so that's where you get these biases that come out even when there wasn't that intention to put it in there. And so I think that's where the discussion of culture is inside companies, inside governments, as we decide as a society, is extremely important, because even then the solutions for some of these problems, there are mathematical definitions of fairness. And this is even separate from privacy data concerns, but there's mathematical definitions of fairness. However, when you use those, you are less accurate in your predictions, and then there is a trade-off. And there is no mathematical way of determining what that trade-off is good or bad to an extent. You can do it to a slightly complicated level of where you can make improvements both to accuracy and to fairness. But you get down to a level of it's now a social choice of whether you want it to be more fair and less predictive, or more predictive and maybe slightly more unfair, more unfair, more accurate. And that can only happen at the individual, at the organizational level of having like these discussions and what we want as a society. And so that's where I think really culture, really, having that strong culture of a company determining whether we should use these, rules, these cutoffs, scores, use the recommendation, should we override the AI? Those are cultural, philosophical questions that need to be answered by people, and there are not computer or mathematical solutions for that.
That's fascinating. And just sort of carrying on around that and picking up on the cultural question that you answered, Margaret, earlier. John in the chat or in the Q&A has asked a specific question of you, Margaret, around bias. So, Margaret, can you speak more about how we might remove bias from AI-driven resume screening tools? If the current workforce reflects systemic bias to a significant extent, how do we find training data for algorithms that does not reflect this bias? And I guess you're dealing with that for real on a day-to-day basis. And how do you go about that?
Well, it's interesting. So the example that Justin was talking about with Amazon, part of what they did there was the data that they actually used to train the model was for people who had successfully gotten jobs at Amazon in the first place. So the people that were getting jobs at Amazon were men between 25 and 35. And right, so the bias was already built in. So how do we societally make sure that we're removing, because there's a human, if we can start to get into explainable AI, and that's, potentially an entire other discussion, but the human machine collaboration is really where we need to go to remove bias. The more diverse the group of individuals included in making those decisions, the better chance we have at removing that bias in the first place, right? So there definitely has to be a human machine collaboration, in my way of thinking, in order to remove these biases. We see it in not only in resume screening, but in law enforcement, and the bias that is brought in there by the data sets, the images that they use to train models. And it's, again, it's an entirely, we could go on for hours to talk about that, but that I don't know if Justin or Kwame has a different answer, but I think that machine human collab is the best way to remove that bias.
Yeah, and if I can also contribute, I completely agree with you. And that human factor involves the human really spending time to clearly define the problem. For the most part, people loosely define problems, and then they just get some data and they build something, right? So clearly defining and articulating the problem, and then spending time on that problem definition, even if it's a simple hypothesis that you are looking at the implications in different angles, will help you to narrow it down. And then when it comes to the data that is also being used, I actually saw an article today from written about Andrew Ng, where he's saying that data science basically is spent 80% of the work of a data scientist is on the data preparation, right? But unfortunately, and just 20% is on the model development. But the 20% is the fun part. And that 80%, nobody likes to do it. So people don't really spend more time on understanding the data, trying to look at the variance, the story of the data, the quality issues, trying to fix them. And then when it comes to also even developing the model, which is 20%, they are also very keen on just applying algorithms. But there are principles that could also be applied and put in check to make sure that at least with your quality data, you are also alleviating some of these biases. I've seen, I don't know if you've seen a post, some of these posts online that says, hey, my model is 90% accuracy, 90% accurate. However, in my data set, assuming it's like 100 records, I have 90% of the transactions being fraudulent or non-fraudulent, and only 10% on the other category. And they use this to build a model, and it says, this is 90% accurate. And everybody goes, fantastic, right? Nobody even goes in to dig in. There are no governance process in place for people to dig in to really see, why is it making these decisions? Can we really explain it? Margaret was talking about explainability. Yes, another dimension, but can we really explain? Do we understand why? Are the techniques actually applied properly before we put this in production? And if we are able to do this, then we'll be able to at least do our best in building solutions that will be fair and transparent.
I think I really love this conversation and the idea of human collaboration, explainability. One of the things that sparked me when we had decided to have this topic was I had been reading an article, and it was all about how Spotify had been awarded a patent for voice assistant. And it's recognized, basically it listens to human emotions in voice commands. And it's the detection of the emotional state. And we all know it's just at the early stages, and I'm certainly no expert, but I think it's a real interesting, crucial point of conversation around what happens when we start to think about a conversational AI, emotionally intelligent AI, and that human collaboration piece. So maybe, Margaret, maybe you could give us your thoughts on that. And Kwame, I'd love you to jump in, but what are your thoughts on this type of innovation? And how much should we be thinking about AI that recognizes human emotion patterns? And what does that mean for us?
So, so right now, so there's the state of AI right now is called narrow AI. And it's very much around a question answer machine, right? Even when we get into deep learning, it's solving for specific problems. So even something like Spotify's patent, it is still, it's not thinking for itself, right? It's not learning. Wide AI, I've mentioned reinforcement learning, which is the ultimate goal, and reinforcement learning is where Skynet or the Terminator, those types of things come to play, where the AI truly is learning on its own. We are so far away from that I truly don't believe that there's anything to worry about, at least not for the foreseeable future. So that's my thought. I'm really interested to hear what Kwame and Justin think about that, though.
Yeah, for AI, and I think this also takes, for me, when I speak about this chapter, it takes me to some of the other, myth or fears that people have, right, towards AI. But to Margaret's point, it's true. It is true that computers are able to learn, and we are using them to make decisions. However, this is really low level intelligence compared to what humans are able to do, right? The social interactions that we have, the cognitive thinking and mindsets that we have, the knowledge discovery that we can do, the pattern recognitions that we can do to be able to even detect these human emotions. And the computers are nowhere, we are nowhere near that, but it's a journey, right? And you have to start from somewhere. So I'm also inspired when people try to come up with techniques, solutions, algorithms to try to detect some of these emotions and put it to work. And my hope is that as we build this, we will consistently learn, which to me calls for a lot of humility. You build something and you realize that I need to learn from it. So there's a feedback loop that goes into it. As you take in, you listen, you take in more information, and you consistently try to improve it. And hopefully we'll get there, but we are nowhere near that.
Okay. We have a question from our audience. So Lavana has asked, how do you see AI helping to improve the lives of people with disabilities and language disabilities or difficulties? I'm interested in knowing if there is any research being done in AI chatbots for sign language. And interesting enough, I know there's quite a bit of work that's being done with user interfaces for speech and gesture recognition technology. So I'm curious, Kwame, do you want to take a stab at this, and the rest of the panel can jump in?
Okay. I have seen some use of AI in disabilities. I think one of the ones that is close to all of us could be some of these assistants that sit in our home, the Alexa and the Google Homes. This has helped with communication for some people. And they consistently even learn vocabularies of others so that they can speak in a way that these people can understand, interpret, and use. They've also helped with languages when it comes to people translating other languages for other people to be able to communicate. There are other technologies, some of these assistants built in our phones, in our computers, that also help with even speech to text, that you can say something and then it's going to type it for you, right? The other angle I see also is there are a lot of people living in homes that need help. They always need aids. They need people to help them. But now there are also AI being applied to technologies that are helping, because now there are smart homes with smart devices that can cater to the needs of some of these individuals. So off the top of my head, these are some of the scenarios that I see, and that comes to mind, and how I see AI helping in the disability. But I think it's a great subject, and a lot of people are thinking about it, and researchers are definitely thinking about it to use AI to improve lives.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I actually just chime in on this? So one of the labs up in at the U of A is called the Blink Lab, and Patrick Polarski is the head researcher there, and he's actually researching prosthetics that, again, human machine collaboration, where the prosthetic limbs that he's building are actually learning from the movements and brain impulses of the individual wearing the prosthetic. And so it's actually moving much further beyond what we see currently in prosthetics, where they're very inflexible. The ability to grip and actually rotate hands is very limited. So the Blink Lab is working on that. So that's something I would definitely, it's BLINC. And it's still very much in the research phase, but it's work that's being done here in the province that I don't think enough people know about. So.
Yep. Also, to just add quickly a little bit more to that, I mean, I think one area where you see AI and then the more hardware implementation of robotics is also helpful for children who have autism or other like difficulty, or when children have difficulty communicating, that using AI can help and assist that and help development in that way. You also see machine learning being brought into areas of clinical psychology where prediction has not been successful using other methods. So unfortunately, because it is the most consequential action that can happen of when individuals attempt suicide, there's not great predictions for, we know like what are the warning signs. We know kind of general warning signs, but of that general list up until, and there's new stuff coming out continuously, but it's like, we know 5 to 10 things, but not really which one of those you should be the most or less worried about to, you know, an accurate degree. And machine learning can kind of help in that way of predicting these rare events that we maybe don't have a great understanding of yet. And so it can really be used in kind of the prediction realm. So people who maybe are struggling with some mental health issues, but don't exactly, they haven't gotten a clear diagnosis, or there's kind of mixed signals about things. This is where possibly machine learning could be useful, is helping people get to a more useful information for some of their own struggles. Now, this is putting on hold lots of data privacy concerns. And I think especially for any individual who is part of what in the United States we'd call like protected groups or legally protected groups, there is even more concerns, because not only is all of our data could be exposed and there's possibly no such thing as anonymous data, then when it's also tied to people who are a legally protected group, then it creates even more concern and more issues. So I think there's lots of positives, but it also then raises the stakes of some of the other ethical conversations we have about machine learning.
I think that is a really good segue into actually a question that we had from one of our listeners or viewers. It says, Justin, you have discussed some of the downfalls of AI in regards to the biases against women and BIPOC. Thinking the last year, for example, with racial equity and equality coming to the forefront of public discourse, do you think we can use AI for the advancements of marginalized groups like women, BIPOC, etc.? We are learning about the evils of AI, but what can be done from a positive perspective?
Yeah, I think, similar to what we were talking about a little bit earlier of the human machine learning connection for the development of it, for the use of data, we also need to think about AI tools, machine learning tools being used in comparison to human beings who make these decisions about things. So there's some newer research that just came out from the Federal Bank of the United States, where there's a group of economists, and found that the machine learning algorithms for bank loans are, whether you would get a bank loan or not, are not discriminatory towards African Americans in the United States or women, which is a positive. And then there's a unfortunate caveat of the amount of money and the interest rate that you would get. There is a bias against women and African Americans, whether they're men or women. However, so that exists from the machine learning. However, it does appear that that outcome is better than when you have human beings make that decision about those things. So I do think that there are a lot of extremely valid concerns about these types of methods, but it's also then, as I kind of said, of AI, artificial intelligence is very similar to intelligence. And we also should be skeptical of human intelligence about things. Humans, smart, very highly intelligent people can make the wrong choices, obviously. We can harm people. We can sometimes actually even use our intelligence to justify a decision. Now, the positive is when it's a human being who maybe has discriminatory, say, loan preferences, and they work at a bank and they're not giving loans at the same rate to women who would qualify for a loan, that person can be fired. And you maybe know that they are doing it. You've heard them say other types of things in the workplace. They can be removed. When it is a machine learning algorithm, it's hard to exactly know why it's doing it. So as we kind of said, it's like, is it the algorithm? Is it the data coming in? Is it combination of these things? Is it people also misinterpreting the recommendations? Lots of different paths. So I think we have to have that benchmark be against, well, what are human beings currently doing about this situation? So, and that is only really just starting to happen like very recently, of tests, more of kind of comparing human to algorithm comparison for some of these issues where where certain groups of people might be harmed by the outcome of the machine learning. So I think there are a lot of positives and it can make things better, but it also could still result in that it will not be instant equality, perfection, at least for a long, long time, possibly until new ways of analyzing things are developed, but it could reduce it more than it currently is now, which is obviously advantageous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Justin. Kwame, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. And one of the things that we practice at BrainToy is we say that humans, everyone is intelligent and we know the rules, we know what is right and wrong, but usually when there are cops around, people tend to follow them. Why? Because they know they could be in trouble, right? And so when you look at most of the methodology for developing machine learning and AI solutions, it's business understanding and problem definition and data preparation and model building, auto deployment, and they have that feedback. But we decided to add another step in there called governance. And that governance puts that human in there to make sure, and there are two ways of doing it. One is, to Justin's point, there are some preliminary equations and packages and algorithms that are being developed still at the research stage that could be applied into making sure that they are transparent and they are explainable, and you avoid unintended consequences. And we do try to apply that. But on top of that, we get that human in the middle to actually critique and verify what has been done by the developer. And that human is independent of the developer, and they have a lot of knowledge. They should have a lot of knowledge about policies and governance and the methodologies for ensuring, AI is ethical. And if that is done, I think, by a lot of organizations, and it's not just part of the process, but it's actual step or stage in the methodology for building your AI solution, then you stand a high chance of catching any of these risks and mitigating them before they go into production.
Mhm. Thanks for that. Wow. We talk about humans. So I do want to talk a bit about how do we prepare humans to be data scientists, so that we can start to think about how to solve for a lot of these complex problems and opportunities that exist. I know, Kwame, you are in fact working with the Social Impact Lab on a project called Humane, which looks at providing AI training and employment opportunities for recent immigrants. And I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to that and why you see it as an important opportunity or project.
Yeah. So I think you and I, Humane, and we all agree that now data science or machine learning solutions and AI are just solutions that could only be built by unicorns, a few group of people, like we said. And to truly democratize AI, we believe that AI is an incredible technology. And yes, we've spoken about a lot of the negatives, but it also has a lot of positives in that it's creating jobs, it's increasing revenue, it's reducing cost, and all of that. And to truly be able to democratize it, you have to put that technology in the hands of everyone. And if you can put that technology in the hands of everyone, then two things has to happen. One, the complexities in the technologies for building this has to be reduced exponentially, such that, I don't have a PhD in computer science, or I don't have a PhD in math, but I do have an understanding that of the principles of machine learning and AI, and I will be able to apply it, even if I cannot code. And the world is moving towards that. A lot of companies are doing that. So when that technology is simple for people to use, then now you have to teach them the principles of applying these technologies. And that's what we are trying to do. That if we can teach you the principles and practically enable you or empower you to apply this, then you can improve yourself, because you become marketable. When you go into an organization, what they need is somebody who can solve problems that can, maybe increase profits or maybe create new revenue streams. And you are the person. So now you are hireable. People can hire you. You can also apply this in your own domain. If you're an accountant or you don't have to move to computer science. You can apply it in construction, in oil and gas. You can apply it there and you'll be able to solve meaningful problems. Or you can pivot and decide that, okay, I want to be a model risk manager. Or, I just want to make sure models are great before they go into production. Or I want to specialize in MLOps, as an example. I just want to make sure there are systematic ways in which models are developed before they go into production. So our main goal with Humane is we want to empower people to acquire this skill, learn the principles, and use it to solve meaningful problems. And that definition of meaningful problems is just up to them, irrespective of their domain. They will be able to solve problems that can improve lives, that can create jobs, and you name it.
Amy, I know you worked, Margaret, you worked with Amy. Globally renowned. I'm curious if you can share with us where you see graduates from Amy going.
Yeah, it's one of the great things, about Alberta is we have this brain trust out of the U of A. We have a ton of people coming out of the U of C now with their new master's program as well. Unfortunately, I think that we're seeing a lot of them leave the province. I think that employers need to find meaningful, challenging problems for AI and ML scientists to solve, so that we can keep some of that brain trust here. You know, we have the benefit of having the Boreal AI up in Edmonton. We have Google DeepMind up in Edmonton. There, you know, we're seeing an influx of larger organizations coming to the province to create those roles. And I think that the more companies that build their own AI solutions and AI teams, the more people that we'll actually see staying here in the province. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I don't know, time is up. Okay.
Well, yeah, we're at time, Kwame. But I want to thank each of you, Margaret, Kwame, Justin, thank you for being our guests. It was a really interesting conversation. And for all of our listeners and viewers, if you want to continue having this conversation with us, you can do so by engaging with us on OpenCity, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Reminder, today's session will be posted on YouTube, and you'll also get a link to share it with your friends, your colleagues. And our next episode is Inclusivity in Design. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Please be safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.